We're seeing an awful lot in the last 6 months that's disturbing to everyone, but certainly disturbing to people in the Black community. Talk to me a little bit about how this is impacting kids' mental health.
Causing increased levels in anxiety as well as symptoms of depression. And so when we think about what are the impacts of that on children, children might also have some similar experiences. And so we know that for children who are in environments where there are higher rates of racism and discrimination, that those kids might have challenges within the school environment around how they may interact with their peers, but also teachers may also behave in ways that also perpetuate some of those stereotypes, negative stereotypes around race. And so they may also have those negative biases that they may have to deal with in the school environment as well. And so you will have children who may have anxiety not only about their own interactions, but also having concerns and fears about how their parents might experience racial injustice.
What should parents be looking out for?
When children experience these types of situations around racial injustice and discrimination, is that you will get some times where children may be more verbal and speak up about some of their fears and anxieties. But you may have kids that are not as verbal and may not talk about those things. And so they may begin to act out some behaviors and become more disruptive or problematic. Children may have difficulties with sleeping, maybe even diet, so having a lack of appetite or overeating. But you can also have children who may have regressions in behaviors. And so for younger children who may be school age, maybe they begin to have problems with weighting themselves when they may have not had those issues before.
If your kids aren't talking about it, do you just not address it, or what's really the best step to take right now?
For most Black families, those children may have already had those conversations. And so what we know is that for many Black parents, they oftentimes will talk with their children about the potential to experience racism and discrimination. And so those are conversations that unfortunately they begin to have very early in life. And sometimes that may be the result of witnessing their own parents, encounter some of those situations. And so now you have to explain to your child why are these things happening and why they may have to be concerned about how they, let's say, interact with police, for example, to reduce the potential that it may result in some sort of harm.
How do you start that conversation? Also, how young is too young to start talking about race?
What we know from the research is that children very young, ages 3 to 4, begin to recognize racial differences. And so because of those sort of characterizations around categories, that they begin to understand, these people look like me, they look different, or I look different than others. And if we think about sort of skin tone among families, that those sometimes bring up differences about why I don't look like mom or dad in terms of skin tone. And so I think those are some basic conversations that may need to start very early with children. And I think when we talk about having the, quote unquote race conversation, is that it doesn't have to be difficult. I think it becomes difficult when we begin to think about the issues around racism, not about just racial differences. And so I think it's really important that parents, regardless of your ethnic or racial background, have those conversations, because children are going to recognize those differences. It's about being able to sort of contextualize those things, to talk about what are the positive aspects of someone's identity, regardless of their background, but also teaching anti-racist behaviors. And that if you witness some of these situations of injustice, or if you yourself experience those things, what are the ways to appropriately respond in those situations? And for children, oftentimes that may result in, seeking the assistance of an adult or an important figure in their lives to sort of intervene in those types of circumstances.
Why is this an important conversation for everyone, not just for members of the Black community?
When we talk about race, racism, racial injustice, is that we all live in a society where we interact with each other. And so we're going to engage with people that are oftentimes different than ourselves. And so I think it's important that we, one, recognize that unfortunately some people are treated differently based upon their race, be honest about those conversations, try to avoid engaging in teaching your child that, race and color doesn't matter. So I think we sometimes think about this idea about, teaching people to think about being colorblind, or if you want to use the terminology, to think about being American, is that we understand that unfortunately people are treated differently based upon, different classes that they even may live in terms of social class. And so I think we have to be able to validate those experiences for oftentimes oppressed groups and for those that don't belong to those communities. So speaking of white families, that you also talk with your children about being anti-racist and how they can sort of confront some of this racial injustice, and also being involved to make sure that there is change at multiple levels, which again, if we think about the school system, children are oftentimes in that environment. And so you have to talk with your kids about how can they interact with others in that space, that are different from themselves.
How do you talk to kids about the very extreme examples we've seen? Police brutality, George Floyd, rallies and protests where people are so angry. What are some good things to say to start the conversation?
I think that as adults and parents, sometimes we don't know how we feel or how we want to express those feelings to kids. And I think that is important that we start there. And then I think the next thing is that once you understand your own emotions in those reactions, is that you are prepared to show those true feelings to your child and to talk through what that means, but also explore their own meaning behind what makes sense for them. Get an understanding from your child. What do they know about race? Where do they learn it from? So oftentimes we expect children to learn things within our homes, but they may also learn things from school and from their neighborhood and from social media. For older children that may have exposure to things like Instagram and Facebook, they may see these images and really not know how to make sense of it. So I think it's important that you have an honest conversation. If the child is frustrated or angry, if you're sad or upset or not sure how to process those things, it's okay. It's about having that conversation and also being able to sort of talk through what can you do to either change how you yourself sort of address issues around injustice, or how can you be more vocal to support those that may be marginalized.
I was going to ask you for some positive activities or examples that families can do to help understand racism, help learn what it means to be an ally.
When we talk about racial and ethnic socialization, we know that talking about race, having these healthy conversations about one's cultural and racial identity, that those things are protective in terms of preventing negative mental health outcomes and fostering a sense of resilience. So it is important to have those conversations about, your own culture and background, and understanding what are these positive aspects of your own identity. The other piece of it is that you want to be able to have conversations, those difficult conversations about what it is like to experience racial injustice. And so I think for children specifically, and younger age children, that it's really helpful to use books as a resource to talk about and understand those experiences of racial injustice, being able to help the child get language to talk about those things. So what is injustice? Like, what does that mean? So that may mean like being treated unfairly based upon your skin color, not being allowed, certain privileges that other people may be able to have as a result of their race. And so those are really important aspects to be able to talk about with children, so that they don't personalize some of those experiences and feel like it's them and not just sort of how people are treating others based upon sort of this group that they may have a negative view towards.
In your mind, are there any don'ts? Parents don't approach it this way?
One thing that is really important is to don't teach your child to not see color. One, I think it's, and I say this often, that it's hard to look at someone and not see their skin color. And so for you to say that you don't see color is really invalidating that person's experience. And I don't think that people sometimes think about it in that perspective, but I think that's what happens when you tell someone that you don't see color, you don't recognize their identity, you don't recognize their heritage. And so it's really important that you do see color and you do see that there are, a variety of positive contributions that people from different backgrounds have contributed to the success of this country. I think you also don't want to invalidate the child's experiences in that if they, are feeling hurt, negative, angry, sad about having to live in a society that experiences racial injustice, is that you don't want to tell them that you're a kid. You have other things to worry about. You don't need to worry about that. I think you want to let your child have those feelings, but be able to help them process those experiences and understand what are some ways that they can improve either their own emotions or what things that they can do to maybe advocate for, racial equality. So maybe they want to write a letter to a local congressman or a leader to talk about, their own experiences and why they think people should all have access to similar resources.
Is there anything that I did not ask you that you want to make sure that our viewers take away from this?
When it comes to thinking about this race conversation is that you don't have to have all of the answers. I think particularly as parents, you feel like you have to have a response when a child brings up an issue, particularly around, dealing with race or racism. And so I think it's okay to not have all of the answers. It's okay to express to your child that you don't have all of the answers. And it's really important that you sort of assess and ask your child questions about their own understanding of it. I think before you even get into talking with your child about how to navigate some of those experiences, is that you do want to check in to say, how are you feeling? What are your thoughts about it? Have you witnessed anyone being treated differently based upon their skin color? What do you think about that? And that allows you an opportunity to, one, sort of understand your child.
Do you have any websites or any places that you could refer parents if they wanted more information?
The American Psychological Association actually has a website. It's called their Resilience Project. And so if you go to their website and you type in resilience, you'll be able to get to their resource page. And so it has information about how to start conversations around race. It also offers a number of different books and resources that you can also be able to utilize based upon if your child is younger, if it's a middle school age child, or even if it's an older teenager or adolescent.